Well, we've now got campus food banks on honestly, I think probably every campus in this country is now with some kind of food charity system in place. And we know that students are the fastest rising group of people using food banks in this country. I mean, those are very, very worrisome statistics. It looks like what we're seeing is the steady entrenchment of charitable food assistance on post-secondary school campuses across the country. Why that's happening is something we really have to think seriously about. I mean, we have done research for years looking at food banks in Canada more broadly and at their impact on the problem of hunger that drives people to be in them in the first place. And what we know is that this is a bad idea, that to have a food bank and to have people using a food bank, it's a signal that there's a problem, a really serious problem, but that's all it is. We shouldn't see it as a sign that the problem's been solved. It's just like a canary in the coal mine. So to have students going to food banks and students starting food banks and students trying to figure out how to expand food banks as a way to deal with acute food needs of their fellow students, it speaks to a terrible problem. Well, I think there's actually a need for some more research to figure out what exactly is driving this problem. I mean, I think there's a need for careful, systematic interrogation of student hunger and student food bank usage. What's driving it? Well, what's always driving people's inability to afford the food that they need? Invariably, it's that they don't have enough money. And in the case of students, that's a question of what kind of financial support we're providing students, coupled with the cost of living and the rising cost of tuition. So it's a mismatch between their costs and their income. And what particular components are responsible, I feel like we need to do more work to know that. But what we've got is a screaming piece of evidence right now telling us that we have at least some students on our campuses that are not able to manage. A campus hunger report, it could be many things, right? I mean, it starts being a report on who's using the food bank on the campus, what the characteristics of them are, what drives them to that place. But it can get bigger than that if campuses are able to actually survey students more broadly. I mean, one of the things that we know from the general population in Canada is that for every person who uses a food bank in Canada, we've got 4 or 5 others that are also struggling to put food on the table, but they're not turning up at a food bank. So one of the things that I think is really important in looking at campus hunger reports is to think about how it is that we can not only chart food bank utilization and growth and what underpins it, but also look at need more broadly, recognizing that it's very, very likely, given the extraordinary stigma of using charity in our country, it's very, very likely that there are people who are struggling that aren't even turning up as part of a food bank statistic right now. Oh, I think that potential has to be huge. I mean, students are energetic people. They're politically conscious, they're thoughtful, they're intelligent, they're engaged, and I think that one of the powers of things like campus hunger reports is drawing attention to the issue and alerting other students who may not be directly affected to the extent of these problems. I think there's huge potential for students to take on this issue and to make really meaningful change. I mean, we've seen strikes on campuses, we've seen general strikes around rising tuition. I think there's a lot that can be done of course there is, there has to be, right? This is a completely unacceptable situation. And the first part clearly is drawing attention to the problem, but I think there's tremendous potential for students to become engaged in this issue and to make really meaningful changes. Well, I think faculty can be supportive both morally and kind of physically in support. I mean, some of us have research capabilities that I think can be lent to the task of cataloging the problem of hunger on campuses and the food bank usage. I think there's a lot of capacity there. I think faculty also, it's in all of our best interest to not have students in our classrooms that are hungry. And to have a healthy population on campuses is in everybody's interest. There's no question that a student who is turning up in a food bank is a student who's struggling to manage, and that student then is not the best student that they can be. And that should concern all of us. So I think there's a very real intersection here of the interests of faculty and students. Well, I think meal exchange has a really important role to play because the history of food banking is so crazy, right? That in the beginning, it's each campus starting their own little organization. You know, a handful of students coming together to try to figure out how to collect donations and how to get funding, maybe from their student union. But it starts as a very individual thing, and I think the importance of meal exchange is that it works at a national scope. It's able to unite. It's able to facilitate the learning between campuses and to build strength across campuses. So I think it's absolutely key that we've got meal exchange taking leadership on this issue now. You know, if you think about one of the complexities of trying to organize around campus food banks is that students by definition are transient, that they're only on campus for a few years and then they graduate. And so there needs to be some sustaining force. And I think meal exchange in its history and its capacity is a tremendously important organization to take leadership and to build leadership on campuses.